Hello everyone, welcome to this video where I'll be showing you how to create a Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktops lab environment for those that want to learn how to implement and build Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktops. In this first part, I'll be creating a Microsoft SQL Server that will host the Citrix databases. The first steps will be to download the latest version of Microsoft SQL Server Express and SQL Server Management Studio so that we can manage our SQL Server instance. I have placed the two download links in the notepad window as shown. I will also place them in the video description. The first link will take us to the page where we can download Microsoft SQL Server. I'll just copy this one now, paste it into Edge. Okay, so if we scroll down and then under where it says Express, click on Download Now. This will download a small file that will allow us to install Microsoft SQL Server Express. The second link will take us to the page to download SQL Server Management Studio. Just highlight that. Okay, if we scroll down, then under the section called Download SSMS, if we click on the Download SQL Server Management Studio, that should go as our installation file for SQL Server Management Studio. Both files are now downloaded. So if we go to the first file, which will install SQL Server 2022 Express, we double click on that, and we get the option. It'll either do a basic install for us or a custom install, or we can download the media. I always prefer to download the media, so if we just click on download media here, it'll pop it into a location for us. I'm just going to pop this onto my desktop. Okay, I'm just going to choose English language for that, and we'll just go for the Express Core option. That should be fine for what we need to do. And then just click on the download button. Now that the download's all done, we can just click close on this box. And then we can run our installer file that came down here, the SQL expr underscore x64 underscore enu file. Let's give that a double click, and it's just going to extract the files. Okay, so in here we need to choose the option of new SQL Server standalone installation or add features to an existing installation. So just click on that. Just take a few seconds to check everything out. Okay, so on the first step, accept the license terms and click next. Next, choose the option to use Microsoft Update to check for updates. I'll just do a scan now. Okay, so we've just got a warning on the firewall. That shouldn't be really be a problem because I'll disable the firewall anyway with this being a test lab. So click next. So on this next page, we're not going to use the Azure extension for SQL Server, so just untick the box and click next. Okay, and then on this box here, in here, we're just going to leave everything as default and just click next. We'll just keep our named instance as SQL Express and our instance ID is SQL Express. Just click next again. Yeah, we'll just leave it as defaults and just click next again. We'll use Windows authentication mode. That's fine. Just click next. Uh, Under the specify SQL Server administrators, I've just using the administrator account that I've yet logged in with. And this will just run through installing now. I'll come back once it's finished. Okay, so we're back again now that everything's installed. As you can see, everything has a status of succeeded. So all we do now is just click on close on there. And just close the SQL Server Installation Center as well. And that's SQL Express installed. Our next step is to install SQL Server Management Studio. So if we find our installer there, which is the ssms-setup-enu, just double click on that. Okay, just accept the default location for that and click install. Just let the installer run through on that. And now that's fully installed, we can just click close. And now we have both SQL Server Express and SQL Server Management Studio installed on here. Okay, so what we're going to do now is open SQL Server Management Studio. So when running SQL Server Management Studio for the first time, just be careful with this encryption setting down here, because by default it's usually set to mandatory. So when you try to connect, it will come up with a certificate error. So just make sure that that's set to optional, and then just click on connect, and it should allow us in then to see the databases. So the first thing I want to do is I just want to change the directory where the databases, log files, and backup save to. So on my machine here, I've added an E drive just for SQL, and I've got a folder for each of backup databases and logs. So for the databases, I'm going to change that one to the databases folder. For the logs, just going to use the logs folder. And for the backup, I'll just use the backup folder on the E drive. Just click OK, and that's saved. And there will be and when you create a database on here, it will then use those default locations. So what we want to do now is configure our SQL Server Express to accept remote connections. So if we click on the top level here and then click on Properties, go to the Connections, and on the remote server connections here, we need to ensure the allow remote connections to this server box is ticked, which it is on here. That's all fine, so just click on OK. Now we need to open SQL Server Configuration Manager. In here, we need to click on SQL Server Services. So in this center pane is a column that lists the process ID for each running service. Look for the PID in the row for SQL Server, which is the middle row here. Identify the port that the PID is listening on by typing this into the command. So as you can see here, the process ID is 200. So if I run a command prompt as administrator, let's make this a bit bigger. So if we type netstart, -ano, then pipe, find, /I, and then put our process number, which was 200. As we can see here, There's no results from the command executed. This is because TCP/IP protocol is disabled and has to be enabled. In SQL Server Configuration Manager, we then now have to go to the SQL Server network configuration here, and in the protocols, click on protocols, and then we have the TCP/IP section here, which shows as being disabled. We can then right-click on TCP/IP and click Enable. So it says any changes will be saved, however, they will not take effect until the service is stopped and restarted. So click OK. So if we then go back to the SQL Server services, find our SQL Server, right-click on it, and then click on Restart. Okay, so our SQL Server service is now started again, and we now have a different process ID, which is 1720. So now, if we go back into our command prompt, run the netstat command again, but enter the new process, which is 1720. And as you can see there now, we can see that the TCP connections are there, and it is listening. Okay, if we go back to the SQL Server Configuration Manager again, and click on SQL Server Network Configuration. Okay, then go back to our protocols, right-click on TCP/IP property and do properties. We click on the IP addresses tab and scroll down, and under IP all, we need to remove the entry in TCP dynamic ports and and instead set the TCP port to 1433. Once you've done that, just click apply. It tells us we don't need to restart the service again, so click OK, and then click OK again. Go back to SQL Service again, and then restart the service. Okay, now this time, so it was process number 6528. So if we go and run the same command now, yeah, as you can see now, the listener there at the top row is now listening on 1433. So that's great. That's working as we want it to. So now we know that's listening on port 1433. The only thing we need to do now is turn on the SQL Server browser service. So if we go back onto SQL Server services here, at the top we've got SQL Server browser. So if we click on that, click on properties for it, and for the start mode, we can change that from disabled to automatic. Click apply, and then just click start. And that service is now running, and we now have the SQL Server browser running, and we've also got SQL Server listening on port 1433, which is what we want. So we're now all ready to start building Citrix and putting the databases onto here. One last thing we need to do on here is, just because this isn't a production environment and it's just being used to test, we don't really need to worry about just opening up the appropriate ports on the firewall. So if we go to Control Panel, Windows Defender Firewall, and then we can just turn our the firewall off so that all the ports are open. So just click OK, and just come out there. And yeah, it's all done, all ready to go, and all ready to have our databases put on. This concludes part one of how to create a Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktops lab environment. From this video, you should now know how to set up Microsoft SQL Server Express and SQL Server Management Studio to be able to host the Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktops databases. If you have any comments or questions, please add them to the comments section of the video. I will try to reply back. Please do give the video a like and also subscribe to the channel for the next part of how to create a Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktop Lab Environment series and for more Citrix content. Thank you very much.